So I probably don't have to tell you that we are in a crisis, and I'm sure you'd agree that the world's in a great deal of turmoil and tumult, and this is probably going to continue, is my feeling. When things aren't really probably going to settle down in any hurry, we're probably going to go from one crisis to the next, and we already have. We've gone from COVID, now we've got the war in the Ukraine, and climate crises looming on the horizon. But Jesus told us to watch these events. None of these things are catching Jesus by surprise. I've entitled this sermon Dig Deep, because now is a time when we do need to be digging deep in the scripture. Now you'll have to forgive me if I go through things fairly quickly and maybe skim through a few things, because I have packed a lot in here and I don't want to keep you forever if I can help it. But Jesus himself told us to watch and keep a tabs on what's going in the world around us. And I'll just focus on the last part of that little quote there. If we fail to dig deep in the mines of truth, we won't be ready for the crisis that is soon to come upon us. And I'm sure that none of us want to be in that category. Now I'll just put this quote up there just to give the background to the importance of watching these things. Unless we understand the importance of passing events and make ready to stand in the great day of God, we shall be registered in the books of heaven as unfaithful stewards. The watchman is to know the time of the night. Everything is now clothed with a solemnity that all who believe the truth should feel and understand. They should act in reference to the great day of God. So, solemn times indeed. And we know from Revelation 13 that Seventh-day Adventists have, for over 150 or so years, understood this description of events in the last days to take the shape of the union of Roman Catholicism with evangelical Christians or Protestantism influencing government to enforce the law, honouring the Sunday in direct opposition to God's Sabbath day, starting in the US and going global. And we further understand that this will be a test of loyalty, of fidelity to God himself and his commandments, and it will not only be a test, but it will be the final test before the coming of Christ. Now, if that concept is new or unclear to anybody here, please feel free to come and chat afterwards or speak to Pastor Dieter or the elders, and we'd be happy to go through that with you. So, but how can it be? How can it come into fruition is really the focus of what I want to talk about today. You can imagine that if Scott Morrison were today get up and say, okay, unless you go to church on a Sunday, we're going to freeze your accounts and imprison you, he'd be laughed out of town. And it makes you think that something has to fundamentally change in order for that end-time scenario to come about. The question is, what would it have to be? What sort of things would have to change? Are those things in train as we speak? Now, obviously, you know, a world leader would get laughed out of town if he did that right away, unless, little by little, there were conditions created which were so abhorrent that that as a solution actually became sensible and reasonable. People would then come to see the rationale for your proposal and be willing to give up some of their rights of freedom of conscience and freedom of religion and go along with the main solution. Now, sadly, many Seventh-day Adventists have lived in what you would call excited anticipation that they would see a cascade of world events and all of these things would happen before their eyes, but things seem to settle down and we perhaps go off the boil and we seem to forget or perhaps even disbelieve that any of this will actually ever happen. But today I hope to awaken us to the nearness of these things and that things are actually transpiring as we speak in the background, or perhaps we're all aware of them. I hope that we all are. But we don't want to be caught out like the five foolish virgins, to put it that way. So while men are sleeping, Satan is actively arranging matters so that the Lord's people may not have mercy or justice. So if we think any of this is going to be fair and we can appeal to the lawmakers, we better think again. The Sunday movement is now making its way in darkness. And I would draw a circle around now, making its way in darkness. This is in Ellen White's day, it's making its way in darkness. How much more so now? The leaders are concealing the true issue, and many who unite in the movement do not themselves see where the undercurrent is tending. So there's an undercurrent that's rippling away there. Its professions are mild and apparently Christian, but when it shall speak, it will reveal the spirit of the dragon. So if we backtrack to the Jesuits, the very reason for the formation of the Jesuit order was to overthrow the Protestant Revolution in the 16th century, and by artifice, by infiltration, by crime, to shape cultures to accept again the authority of the Pope. So my question is, what would one need to do to get to that point of being able to, at last, legislate Sunday observance? Well, as we read in that passage from Revelation, it deals with worship and it deals with finances. So keep those 2 points in mind. The first one I want to address is you would need unity of all religions. Now, we're probably aware of this ecumenical movement to bring all religions together and reach a common worship experience. And this movement really has its origins in the modern era in the Vatican II Council in 1962. And one of the key ways that they were going to achieve that was through liturgy, which is the forms of worship, not the doctrines themselves. In other words, the Catholic charismatic renewal. So why would they focus on that rather than just saying, why don't we bring our doctrines together and form an agreement? Well, here we go. It was recognised that worship has more power to unite and reconcile than do documents and negotiations. Because if you sit down and read all the fundamental beliefs, they're at loggerheads. But you can bring everybody together through these common worship forms. And so since that time, we've seen a proliferation of interfaith dialogues and common interests. Is this not clicking? There we go. Right, it's just a bit slow. So, you've got the Lutheran Joint Declaration. Lutherans now share clergy with the Catholic Church, whereas once they're arch enemies. You've got the Pope meeting with evangelical Christians, Donald Trump. Melania's Catholic, Donald Trump's not, but nonetheless they pay homage to the Pope. There's the Pope with all the evangelical Christians and charismatics. The Lutheran Reconciliation Pact, the Pope there with lots of Muslims, and World Council of Churches, etc. And then you've got this one, the new Abrahamic religion, or Abrahamia as they want to coin it, a new religion combining Islam, Christianity and Judaism. I had often wondered, how you would get Muslims to keep a Sunday or the Jews to keep Sunday, and not hard to see how this could be one of the steps towards that. And you've got, some Jewish writers now extolling the virtues of when in Rome, do as the Romans do. So when you're in the West, well, just keep your day as a Sunday, So these things are starting to creep in, even amongst people who we thought would never accede to it. Now, when you look at it, though, the terms of all this fraternity, and this is the Abrahamic, what do they call it? I forget what they call the place now, but it's basically 3 places of worship, a Christian church, a mosque and a synagogue, all on the one as part of the Abrahamic religion. So this unity, though, on whose terms? I mean, when you look at what the Pope has written in his encyclical Fratelli Tutti, it's often all about doing it on their terms. In other words, you come back to the Mother Church, and you're the one who's going to compromise and come back to us. And so while they're on the one hand building bridges to all religions, he's demonising anybody who decides to stand separate to the collective, demonise people who keep the commandments of God, and also conflate fundamentalism, or a person who has fundamentalist beliefs, to a terrorist or a violent group. And this is the Pope here. A fundamentalist group, although it may not kill anyone, although it may not strike anyone, is violent. The mental structure of fundamentalists is violence in the name of God. So we as Adventists would be considered a fundamentalist religion because we believe that the Bible is true and we believe what we believe is true. Makes sense, really. You wouldn't believe what you believed was wrong. But here we are. Fundamentalists over the last few decades have been subtly conflated with terrorism, and there's the Pope's coming out and saying it. You don't even have to do anything, you just have to think that way. And so, you can be, under the pretense of a hate crime, you can be basically outlawed for saying anything negative about any other religion or belief structure. Or, for that matter, if you have alternative views on marriage, the family, sexuality and gender. Look at this guy as an example. You'll get banned, you'll get censored, you'll get proscribed and prosecuted. Thanks, brother. And anybody on the contrary who avidly adheres to God's commandments would be painted as sick, as you can see here. Recently, during a homily at Casa Santa Marta in the Vatican, he said that those who unbendingly follow the law of God are sick and in need of the Lord's help. So just digest that one for a moment. The Ten Commandments are too rigid, according to the Pope. Rigidly following the law of God is sick. So, in other words, you would unite all religions, as he's championing there, but you would unite against one particular group, right? Those who keep the commandments of God. Don't need to say too much more about that. What else would you need to bring about this end-time scenario? Well, you would need to undermine the freedoms enshrined in the US Constitution and other free countries. Now, America was founded on the twin principles of republicanism and Protestantism, civil and religious liberty. Now, what does the papacy think of that? Well, they don't mince any words here. The absurd and erroneous doctrines or ravings in defence of liberty of conscience are a most pestilential error, a pest of all others most to be dreaded in a state. And that's obviously from Great Controversy, which hopefully most of you are reading. So, in true Jesuit form, there has been a steady infiltration of American politics by Catholics and Catholic adherents. This hit perhaps what was a high note in 2015 when Pope Francis was invited to address none other than the US Congress, the first Pope ever to do that. Some people would have thought that would never happen in free and Protestant America, but there we go. Many probably thought that Trump would bring in Sunday laws due to his desire to give more power to churches. I know I did when I saw Trump take the presidency. But now under Biden, what have we got? We've got Catholics basically in the three main branches of the US government. Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, Joe Biden, of course, President, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts, and the majority, in fact, of the Supreme Court judges are themselves Catholic as well. So we can see that taking shape. I just threw this one in there because it might be interesting to also note who else was proud of their Jesuit training, and I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions on what that means. So, what else would you need? You would need some sort of sway over world finances, because this end-time scenario obviously involves finances, not being able to buy and sell. The Pope calling for a new world order says wasting the COVID crisis would be worse than the pandemic. The Pope calls for a new world order after the pandemic. Headlines like these are not too hard to find. It might be interesting to note that after the GFC in 2009, Pope Benedict called for a new financial order as well. It seems like you get a similar thing after every major crisis. And then there's this. This is 2011. In a widely expected note on the financial crisis and economic justice, Vatican officials accidentally called for the establishment of a one-world global authority to regulate financial markets and national governments. Well, I don't know. You tell me where that would take us. Pope joins global elite to plan for the world after COVID. This is the Council for Inclusive Capitalism, and it has none other than the Rockefellers, Rothschilds, CEOs of multinational pharmaceutical companies, banks, credit card societies, etc., etc. So it's not hard to see the Pope drawing strong connections there with everybody who wields power and influence in the financial world, which, as we know, can have ominous overtones, knowing what we know. What else would you need? Well, you would perhaps also need to have independent, smaller individual enterprises crippled and have some control and influence over the larger ones. But we can see the control and influence the papacy has over some of the larger ones. But what's happened recently? Well, the rich are getting richer. There's Apple CEO Tim Cook. There's Mark Zuckerberg, of course, from Facebook, or Meta as it's now called. Google CEO Eric Schmidt, all going to the Vatican. I was just reflecting the other day, do you think they were going to tell him what to do, or the other way round? I don't know. So you've got businesses going belly up, you've got families needing food handouts and government financial assistance. Since the start of this pandemic, billionaires have increased their wealth by more than 25%, while the 150 million poorest have fallen back into extreme poverty. The work from home economy has crushed small business and juiced profits for big tech and big retail. Tragic. But this is where we're headed. The lower and middle class are crippled, and if you look at things like the World Economic Forum and their plan for the financial order of the world, this is where they would see us heading, where you basically own nothing anyway, but you will be happy. And you've got banks buying up all these homes of people who have no doubt defaulted. This is Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum and their Great Reset, which you're no doubt familiar with. If not, have a look at it. It's kind of scary. But they say there, you'll own nothing and be happy. Well, somebody owns everything. Who's that going to be? Then, and this is a quote from that book, The Great Reset. First and foremost, the post-pandemic era will usher in a period of massive wealth redistribution from the rich to the poor. I wonder who they think about in rich. Maybe the people who have already lost their riches in the pandemic, that level of rich, and from capital to labour. So in other words, losing your capital there. This is the Pope now himself telling us that the right to private property, as they have taught for quite some time in the Catholic social doctrine, the right to private property is always accompanied by the primary and prior principle of the subordination of all private property to the universal destination of the earth's goods, and thus the right of all to their use. And so Walter Veit, of course, talks a lot more about that social doctrine in detail, but basically they teach that you have severe limits on your right to own anything, and if somebody else needs it more than you, they're within their rights to take it, thanks very much, and it's not stealing. So Pope Francis quoted here, referenced, Francis advocated for a more austere existence in which he deemed necessary in order to effect a fair distribution of resources, and then expressed his support for businesses and industries only continuing if they align themselves with the globalist green agenda. So, if you don't go along with the agenda, you basically won't be allowed to operate, you won't have finances, your assets and your private property will be redistributed, to use that term. And so I just think, when they talk about closing the gap between the rich and the poor, I wonder whether it's so much making the poor richer as making the well-off people poorer and closing the gap that way. That's how it would seem when you join all these dots together. And I might just throw in this point here that it might be of interest to note that Pope Francis himself, a Jesuit, and Klaus Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum and the author of The Great Reset, both cite the self-same person as the most influential person in their life in terms of shaping their thinking and outlook, and that is Don Helder Camara, who's a socialist Jesuit from South America. So, and yet I couldn't find anything online referencing the two of those people, Klaus Schwab and Pope Francis, having meetings together or talks together. They're influenced by the self-same person. It makes me think that would be too obvious, but I mean, if you keep that point in mind, it wouldn't be hard to construe that there's some commonality between them in their modus operandi. This is just referencing another economic visionary that the Pope praises, heading for a welfare state. This is actually an article in Time magazine where she wrote about it as if it had already happened, right? Governments use the digital revolution to improve public services from digital health to e-cards and create a citizen-centred welfare state. So, you know, someone who draws praise from the Pope thinking that that's where we need to head to solve some of our societal problems. And so if we're heading for a welfare state, you're going to need to overthrow, on the one hand, individualism and capitalism as well. And so this is what the Pope thinks of individualism and capitalism, the dung heap of the devil. And so that's why he's formed this council, I suspect, for inclusive capitalism, calling it something else. Now, what else would you need to do to bring about this final scenario of complete control over people's consciences, as we've read? You would need to re-educate. And so the papacy has their finger in that pie as well. Compacts there on religion and education. And this was just a passage from that. The aim of the meeting was to actuate all necessary measures to put education and the human person at the centre of the international agenda, so it's global. Religions are called to add their voice to the movement for a new education that can redirect the world towards universal fraternity. So globalism again through education. And education as well, looking forward in regards to the climate. And you'll notice there that's from the Ignatian Carbon Challenge. So Ignatius Loyola, the founder of the Jesuit order, putting his name to ecological conversion and climate change, carbon reduction. I don't know, you can draw your own conclusions once again about that one. But just to pause it there for a minute, another thing that I see that we would need to bring about this scenario is obviously control. You can control the finances and you can control religions, but unless you can control people's individual choices and consciences, you're not going to get very far. But where have we been recently? Well, I'd say that regardless of what your personal views are and on the coronavirus crisis and the measures that have been put in place by governments to reach into our lives, and some might say overreach into our lives, we certainly have to agree that just about every aspect of our lives has been controlled, as we've seen recently. So, for instance, whether you can leave your house or not, whether you can, how far you can go, what hours you can go, who you can go with, whether you can exercise, how long you can exercise, whether you can leave your country, state or suburb, how close you can stand to somebody else, whether you can hug anybody, how many people you have in the room, whether you go to church, whether you can sing or not, whether you can have a wedding, whether you can be by your dying loved one's side, who can be at your funeral, whether your Facebook page or your YouTube channel is going to be allowed, whether you can make a health decision for your 12-year-old child, whether you can have a SIM card, such as in Pakistan, whether you can see your doctor, as even here in Australia, whether you can earn a living, whether you can use public transport, gyms, restaurants, whether you can receive government welfare, and whether you can access banking services, such as in Nigeria. So, at risk of stating the obvious, our consciences are being controlled even now, and we are being conditioned to view certain people in society as inferior or second-class citizens. And, you know, you probably remember this statement from Dan Andrews, that we're going to have a vaccinated economy and we're going to lock some people out, because that's far better than locking everybody down. Some might say there's a principle there that is being crossed. Now, when you think about freedom of conscience, we're often very quick to point the finger at China and some of their human rights abuses and their encroachment into everyday life and controlling the lives and the movements and the choices of their everyday citizens. How would that relate to what we understand in Revelation 13? Well, this is Cardinal Sanchez Sorondo from the Chancellor. He's a Chancellor of the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences, and he states that China is the best implementer of Catholic social doctrine. They're developing well and has many points of agreement with the Vatican. So that should tell you something about the way that the Vatican and the papacy thinks about our freedom of choice and individualism, as we saw before. Now, so after putting in, as I see it, these sorts of movements and these strategies in place, you would then need to extend them to include a crisis which has, surprise, surprise, Sunday as its solution. Now enter the climate crisis. Perfect. So the science journals are naming the climate crisis as a bigger threat to human health than COVID. And the methods used to combat COVID will need to be the same as in the climate crisis. So there we have the editorial noting that the climate change requires the same kind of funding and focus that the COVID pandemic has received. And just flash these headlines up: how COVID might help us win the climate change battle, etc., etc. Mass behaviour change, policies guided by science. Acting for the greater good, just what the climate crisis needs. So the COVID-19 crisis shares marked similarities with the climate crisis. The pandemic and climate change both present potentially devastating global problems with need for rapid remediating government intervention. Government intervention. Extreme weather events are grim reminders that the world has a much bigger existential crisis on its hands than COVID-19. So, I don't know, if you stop and think about what's happened with COVID-19 and perhaps magnify that by a few times because it's a much bigger crisis, I shudder to think what that's going to look like. What lockdown showed us is that changing society overnight is possible. It's been a test run of the positives and negatives. So, is a climate lockdown next? Will we go from a COVID lockdown to climate lockdown? And I'll just quickly skim through this. I was just talking about some of the things that governments might do under a climate lockdown, you know, banning private vehicle use, consumption of meat and how we use our energy, etc., etc. And impacting on companies as well. And you note there they're calling for an overhaul of economic structures and doing capitalism differently. So if we think that our capitalist economy and our free world is going to continue forever, we could be mistaken. Now, this particular quote was from a Jesuit father, Thomas Rees. And he's ruining the fact that the church doesn't have the power that it used to. But it's quite insightful, I think, to see the way he's couched this quote. And I'll just quickly read it. The church used to have the power to make and break kings, the power to shape cultures and command people's actions. Too bad it doesn't have such power to save humanity from itself today. Would that the Pope could declare vaccine skeptics and climate change deniers heretics and put their books, articles, Facebook pages and tweets on the index of forbidden books. So, I mean, to me that just tells me that that same attitude or that despotic power that was wielded by the papacy 200 and something years ago, that mindset hasn't gone away. No. Not at all. And we're fooling ourselves if we think it has. Well, he just might get his wish on this one because Google and YouTube, etc., has started to ban ads on climate misinformation, and there's more that's happened since I put this presentation together as well. And then once you had, you know, if you were trying to pull off this end time scenario as we see it, Once you had conflated climate as the next big crisis and put all these strategies in place to control it, you could potentially bring religion into it. And here we go. Can faith leaders shift public opinion towards climate action? The faith leaders getting in on the act for COP26, which happened at the end of last year. And here we have Cardinal Peter Turkson, who's one of the prominent cardinals when it comes to climate change agenda, telling us that the imperative for care of nature also extends to the teaching about resting on the Sabbath day, which is for human beings also to preserve all creation. But if you listen to everything, they say it's Sabbath day, but gets twisted around to be Sunday, of course. And so what they're really talking about there is a Sunday being a solution for the environment and for climate. But some might say, really? Nobody's ever going to take that seriously? Well, this is the Pope going on. Sunday, like the Jewish Sabbath, is meant to be a day which heals our relationships with God, with ourselves, with others, and the world. So rest opens our eyes to the larger picture and gives us renewed sensitivity to the rights of others, and so the day of rest, centred on the Eucharist, sheds its light on the whole week and motivates us to greater concern for nature and the poor. So once again, Sunday's being construed as a solution for the climate and for economic woes. Interesting that. But as I said, would anybody take it seriously? Well, people are taking it seriously. Just one example, the Green Sabbath Project. You possibly have seen this, championing having a day off for the environment, one day every week, do nothing. Take a weekly day of rest. Make it a real Sabbath for you, for Earth. Don't drive, don't shop, don't build. Take a walk. Eat with friends. Play or read with your kids. Sing, meditate, celebrate contentment. So you can see how things are progressing along quite nicely and quite rapidly. And we need to pay attention. God has given us warning of the impending danger. Let this be unheeded, and the Protestant world will learn what the purposes of Rome really are, only when it is too late to escape the snare. She is silently growing into power. Her doctrines are exerting their influence in legislative halls, in the churches, and in the hearts of men. Stealthily and unsuspectedly, she is strengthening her forces to further her own ends, and when the time shall come for her to strike, all that she desires is vantage ground, and this is already being given her. We shall soon see and feel what the purpose of the Roman element is. Now, one of the things that strikes me out of that is that it's stealthy and it's happening now. And, you know, we would be foolhardy to expect that there's going to be nothing happening now. Everything's just trickling along in a random fashion, and it's going to be nothing. Well, Sunday law, death decree. It's not going to happen like that. Things are building up slowly and surely, and they're happening all around us as we speak. And the question is then, well, what do we do about it? And I'm the first to concur that it's not going to do us any good just to know this unless it impacts on our spiritual experience. I break this last section of my message down into three categories, if you like: personal preparation, practical preparation, and preparation of others. So the end of all things is at hand. Therefore be serious and watchful in your prayers, and above all things have fervent love for one another, for love will cover a multitude of sins. It's no good knowing all of these events and prophecies if it doesn't impact on us, if it doesn't change us, if it doesn't make us serious about our walk with the Lord, about having the love of Jesus living in our hearts that other people can sense and see. This is what it's all about. These signs, these world events, they're just there to wake us up to the fact that it is real, it's happening, Jesus is coming soon. We need to be searching our hearts. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxieties. See if there's any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. And this passage here, what is my relation to God? Do I love him with my whole heart and soul and mind and strength? Can I give substantial evidence that I've entered the fold of Christ, let everyone dig deep, laying a sure foundation on the solid rock. And that really is our work personally, at a personal level for now. We know that probation will close soon after the Sunday law, or for Adventists specifically who already know the truth at the time of the Sunday law. But realistically, our probation could close any minute. We never know. Make every day that determination to be sure that you're right with God, that every sin is confessed, and that you're relying on his strength to overcome sins in future. We need to be separating ourselves from the world and all worldly practices. We need to search our hearts and ask ourselves, where are we spending our time, our energies, our focus? Is it on the language, the dress, the entertainment, the music, even Christian so-called contemporary music? You would want to ask yourself serious questions about that. Are we putting away these things from us, anything that we wouldn't want to meet and face again in the judgment? Friendship with the world is enmity with God. I'll keep moving. Second point, evangelism or preparation of other people. So many people are in darkness. You know, as Mrs. White put it, souls are perishing out of Christ every tick of the clock. And it's just a tragedy. And we can see things happening so quickly around us. It really, to me, as I've studied more of what's happening in the world, it's really put a bomb under me to say, Lord, help me find a way to reach somebody. Give me an opportunity. Take that step, have that conversation with somebody, give somebody that book. Do whatever we can to reach souls. And at this time, there are so many people that are searching, looking at what's happening in the world, even amongst secular folk, and they're just searching for answers, and we need to give them this truth from God. In a special sense, Seventh-day Adventists have been set in the world as watchmen and light bearers. To them has been entrusted the last warnings for a perishing world. On them is shining wonderful light from the Word of God. They have been given a work of the most solemn import, the proclamation of the first, second, and third angels' messages. There is no other work of so great importance. They are to allow nothing else to absorb their attention. Now, the third thing I would say is practical preparation. We know that there's a time coming when we won't be able to buy and sell, and as Mrs. White describes it, every earthly support will be cut off. So great changes are soon to take place in our world, and final movement will be rapid ones. I don't know about you, but I certainly think that we're seeing some of the great changes that she could have been referring to there. Are things going to settle down? I mean, we told things were going to settle down when we reached our 80%, 90% vaccination targets, and it's still going on, still going strong. And there's going to be more crises. There's a war crisis now. The climate crisis, as we said, is looming. We've seen how quickly our freedoms have been restricted, how quickly our ability to provide for our own needs and our families' needs has been stripped. So digging deep into the counsel we've been given, get out of the cities. Obviously, we're not in a big city here, which is a great start. But we need to dig deep into what it is we're supposed to be doing out of the cities. We're advised there to be in a position to raise our own provisions, for in the future the problem of buying and selling will be a very serious one. And we should begin to heed the instruction given us over and over again. And just a few examples here of headlines that just underscore the fact that things can change so quickly. Pipeline cyber attacks crippling the energy supply, petrol shortages, food shortages, supply chain disruptions, higher food prices, cyber attacks, healthcare, amongst other things. And we're told this, that ere long there will be such strife and confusion in the cities that those who wish to leave them will not be able. We must be preparing for these issues, and this is the light that God has given to us. If our people regard God's instruction as of value, they will move away from the city, And those who choose to remain in the cities surrounded by the houses of unbelievers must share the disaster that will come upon them. It's one of the most striking passages that I've read on that topic. Fathers and mothers who possess a piece of land and a comfortable home are kings and queens. And so God has given us this, if you like, inside information, this military intelligence as to what is happening in the world around us, so that we're not left floundering, flapping in the breeze and at the mercy of the government diktats, or just completely in the dark about what to do next. So this is why I've entitled this message, Dig Deep. Now is the time we need to get out those books, dig deep into them, read them. What has God told us as a people? If we've been given this light, this inside intelligence, we've been given the scoop, and we don't listen to it and don't follow it, what can we expect? We can expect great hardship and potential complete disaster. You see, Satan himself and human agents, the papacy, wants you and I to be enslaved in body and in mind, just as the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt. But God wants his people to be free. And that's why he's given us this inside intelligence, so we can be prepared. But in the same way as the Israelites had to follow the instructions given to them at the Passover, so we will need to follow the counsel given to us now. And it's not just for us to be, it's not to make our life hard, it's to make our life bearable in the time of a tremendous crisis. And it's not for us just to be selfish and to set ourselves up so that we survive the crisis and I'm just fine, thanks very much, pity about you guys. God wants us to be active, free, and ministering to other people throughout that time of crisis. So, you may be wondering how to follow the counsel we've been given, and I don't propose to have all of the specific answers for you, but God does. And I firmly believe that if we set our mind to dig deep in that counsel and say, Lord, how can you help it come to fruition? He'll open doors for us. So there we are. We can see that things are rapidly speeding up all around us in different fronts, and even since I put this presentation together, things have sped up even more. I wish I had the time to update it fully, but perhaps another time. I just simply pray that every day will find us, as we say, digging deep into the Word, the Spirit of Prophecy counsels we've been given, growing in our faith. Now's the time that our faith needs to really be exercised and strengthened, growing in our obedience to everything God's shown us, and found eagerly desiring to share the truth, the present truth for this time with everybody we can, so that many will be with us, ready for his return. Maranatha.